You know, there is a very strange moment in life when you realize that the thing you built has quietly become who you think you are. And you don't really notice it while you're building it. You're just working, you're just scaling, solving problems, leading people, making decisions, trying to move fast. And then one day, that structure actually disappears. And not gradually, but just gone. And and the silence that follows is much, much louder than any success you've ever had. And I remember sitting with that silence and thinking a lot. Not dramatic, not cinematic, but I had just a very simple question. If this is gone, who I am right now? And that question was and is destabilizing because for many years, I had momentum, I had responsibility, I had people depending on me, and I had a team, I had a structure, and suddenly none of this defined me anymore. And what surprised me the most was not really the financial pressure. It was how I I think it was how exposed I felt internally. And I had always considered myself very strong person, decisive, strategic, resilient. But when the external structure disappeared, I realized something very uncomfortable. I realized that a part of my confidence was actually borrowed from the system I had built. And without it, I had to test in the end whether I was still standing. And there were opportunities, a lot of opportunities to rebuild something very similar. And honestly, I could have, but and I understood the industry. I understood the scaling. I understood the teams and how to build high performing teams. But I started asking a different question. Not can I build it again, but why would I build the same thing again? And and what is the real evolution here? Because rebuilding the same external success would have felt, impressive. But internally, I knew I would be repeating that same pattern again. And I think that was the first moment I consciously choose growth over validation. So instead of immediately constructing something new, I decided to slow down. And that was very, very unnatural for me. I had always moved fast, and suddenly I was just studying myself. And psychotherapy became much deeper. Psychology became very serious. And I wanted to understand not only how I build systems, but why I built the way I built it, why I trusted certain people, why I ignored some certain signals, why I equated responsibility with control. And that period probably stripped away a lot of illusion. And I realized how much leadership is actually performance, even when you don't intend it to be, but you perform confidence, you perform certainty, you perform stability. And over time, you start believing your own performance until life removes that stage. And that's when you meet yourself without applause. And trust me, it's not it's not comfortable, but it is clarifying. And I began to notice something. I think the qualities that had made me successful. Uh, were the same qualities that had created actually blind spots. My ambition created scale. It also created pressure. And my loyalty built strong teams, but it also delayed hard decisions. And it was not easy for me. My optimism, for example, allowed risk, but it also ignored red flags. And for the first time, instead of trying to fix these traits, I started really integrating them. So I stopped trying to become a better version. I started becoming a more coherent version. And there is a difference. Becoming better often means rejecting parts of yourself. And becoming coherent means understanding them. And at some point of my life, I relocated. New environment. It was in the middle of the pandemic. Silence again. There were no people around, no events. And I realized something very simple. Most leaders don't fail because they lack intelligence. They fail because they are disconnected from themselves. They build structures. They build structures faster than they build awareness, and they scale operations faster than they scale maturity. And systems eventually exposed that gap. That insight changed how I work today. Today, I don't approach leadership as a strategy problem. I approach it as an identity problem. Every company reflects the nervous system of its founder. If the founder is anxious, the culture becomes reactive. If the founder avoids conflict, the team becomes passive aggressive. And if the founder seeks validation, the strategy becomes noisy. And you can't out strategize internal misalignment. You can only integrate it. And here is something I didn't understand earlier in my career. What we call imperfections are usually unintegrated strength. And today I really understand how does it work. Sensitivity becomes overthinking when it's unmanaged. Intensity becomes burnout when it's unconscious. Empathy, for example, becomes weakness when boundaries are unclear. But when I integrated those same traits, become leverage. And that realization was not theoretical. It was it was very it was personal. And losing the identity I had built forced me to meet the parts of myself I had avoided for quite a long time. Doubt, fear, ego, attachment to status, and instead of eliminating them, I started studying them at the time. And that's when leadership changed for me forever. It became quieter, less about control and more more about coherence, and less less about proving, more about precision. And now when I work with founders or executives, I'm not impressed by scale alone. I always look for integration. Are they aligned internally? And I can see it right away when I meet with the team or when I meet with the founder. And do they know what drives them? Do they know what destabilizes them? Because a company cannot outperform the maturity of its leader. And that's for sure not philosophy. That's the pattern recognition. And if I look back at everything, the success, the loss they're building, today I don't see a dramatic story. I see a refinement process. I see a young leader who also believed that leadership meant control. And I see a man who now understands leadership means integration. And if there is one thing I gained from losing everything, it could be this: my identity is no longer tied to what I build. Um, it is really tied to how I build it today, and that and that changes everything.